He was just trying to drive home, but two officers decided he was a threat because of the color of his skin. They thought he was an easy target. They had no idea he was the one who ran the entire police department. A wrongful arrest. A courtroom reveal that shook the system. A powerful stand for justice, truth and real authority. Stay until the end to witness how one man turned humiliation into historic reform. This isn't just a story. This is a reckoning. The tires of a dark gray sedan crunched softly over the gravel shoulder of Willow Creek Road, a quiet residential street nestled on the outskirts of Savannah, Georgia. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, and the golden warmth of dusk had given way to a cool, starlit sky. Behind the wheel sat Elias Warren, a 49-year-old man known in professional circles for his composed demeanor and years of community service. He had just wrapped up a day filled with talks with city planners, school board officials, and leaders from local nonprofits' efforts he'd long believed were building a better future for Savannah. His thoughts drifted toward home, to the pot of seafood gumbo his wife was probably simmering on the stove, and the old jazz record she always played while cooking. But his reverie shattered when flashing red and blue lights lit up in his rearview mirror. The sudden burst of color pierced the darkness like a siren inside his mind. Elias's jaw tightened ever so slightly as he glanced down at the dashboard. 32 miles per hour in a 40 zone, no malfunction indicators, headlights on. Still, the patrol car behind him blared its siren, urging him to pull over. Stay calm, he whispered to himself. The mantra wasn't new. He had said it before too many times. With practiced caution, he signaled right and eased the car to a gentle stop under a streetlight. He knew the drill. Hands visible. No sudden movements. Be polite, composed. Not because he had anything to hide, but because history had taught him that how he appeared could be just as important as who he was, especially in moments like this. The door of the patrol car swung open. A younger officer stepped out, flashlight already on, beam slicing through the night. A second officer exited from the passenger side and took a post by Elias's rear bumper, hand resting ominously near his holster. The lead officer approached quickly and barked, "You in a hurry tonight?" Elias looked up, his tone respectful but calm. "No sir, just heading home." The flashlight lingered a beat too long on Elias's face, then flicked down to the center console, his hands, then back up again. License and registration. Elias nodded and narrated every motion as he moved. "I'm reaching for my registration from the glove box now. My license is in my wallet. I'll get it right after this." The officer gave no reply, but Elias noticed the subtle stiffening in his posture. "Do you know why I stopped you?" the officer asked, though his tone made it clear he wasn't looking for an answer. Elias began, but was cut off. "You were swerving. Crossed the center line." Elias's brow furrowed. "With respect, sir, I wasn't. My dash cam will confirm." "Dash cam?" the officer snapped. "That's going to be evidence. Step out of the vehicle." The escalation jolted Elias. "Is there a problem, officer?" "I've complied fully." The second officer was already on the move, yanking open the driver's side door. "Step out. Now." With tension building in his gut, Elias carefully unbuckled his seatbelt, raised his hands, and exited the vehicle. No sudden moves. Still calm. Before he could ask another question, the second officer twisted his arms behind him and snapped on the cuffs. "Is this really necessary?" Elias asked, voice firm but controlled. "Resisting, huh?" the lead officer sneered. "Bad move." The cold steel bit into his wrists as the realization sank deeper. This wasn't about a traffic stop. This was profiling, clear, direct, and dangerous. As they pushed him into the back of the squad car, Elias caught sight of familiar porch lights glowing down the street. A few neighbors peeked from behind curtains, their silhouettes framed by worry or worse, indifference. But Elias knew something the officers didn't. They had just handcuffed the wrong man. And this wouldn't end the way they expected. The squad car creaked slightly as it began to roll down Willow Creek Road, the rhythmic clinking of Elias Warren's handcuffs a cruel reminder of the humiliation he was being forced to endure. He sat stiffly in the back seat, posture upright, eyes staring out the window as familiar houses and street signs drifted past in a surreal blur. He had passed these roads for years, attending block parties, meeting with residents about school safety programs, even helping organize neighborhood watch groups. Yet tonight, he wasn't Elias, the community leader or the man behind the new public safety initiative. Tonight, in the eyes of these two officers, he was nothing more than a suspect. A threat. A problem to be handled. In the front seat, the officers spoke as if Elias wasn't even there. Officer Daniels, the younger of the two, adjusted the rearview mirror and glanced back with a smirk. "So what's your deal, man?" he said, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Late night run? Or just trying to give us a little excitement for once?" Elias met his gaze through the mirror. His voice, calm but deliberate, replied, "I was simply trying to get home." Daniels chuckled like it was a punchline. "Sure you were." From the driver's side, Officer Reed, a bulkier, older man, let out a laugh. "They always got a story, don't they?" he said to Daniels, not bothering to lower his voice. "Must be something about that look." Elias didn't answer. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction. But inside, something coiled in his chest, a storm of humiliation, disbelief, and quiet fury. Not for himself. He had endured worse. But for what this moment represented. For every man like him who didn't get the chance to walk away. "Reckless drivers always think they're saints," Reed added. "Maybe this one's got something stashed. Might want to check the trunk later." Daniels laughed again. "Or maybe just likes wasting our time." Elias turned his head away from them. Out the window, the darkness pressed in closer, and the lights of downtown Savannah twinkled faintly in the distance. He focused on his breathing, deep, even, steady. His mind raced with options, legal protocols, and what steps he'd take when this nightmare reached its inevitable end. But this wasn't over. Not yet. The car turned into the small precinct lot. It was past midnight, and most of the station was quiet. The fluorescent lights flickered faintly, casting long shadows on the asphalt as Reed opened the door and yanked Elias out without a word. Inside, the station's lobby echoed with their footsteps. Daniels removed the cuffs with a theatrical twirl and grinned. "Welcome to paradise," he said mockingly. "You'll be staying with us a little while." Elias rubbed his wrists, still red from the steel. "Am I being charged with anything?" he asked, his voice firm but even. "We'll let you know," Reed replied, smirking. "After we figure out what you're hiding." He was led through a narrow corridor and into a holding cell no bigger than a storage closet. The cold metal door slammed shut behind him, echoing through the empty hallway. Alone now, Elias sat on the hard bench, hands folded, back straight. He stared at the blank wall in front of him and breathed deeply. He wasn't angry, not yet. He was calculating. Reflecting. Waiting. Out in the hallway, Daniels and Reed leaned against a desk, sifting through the registration and license they'd taken from his car. "Clean," Daniels muttered, almost disappointed. "Doesn't matter," Reed said. "Guys like that always hiding something. We just gotta dig." Elias overheard it all. Every word. He closed his eyes and clenched his hands together. They didn't know who they were dealing with. But they would. Soon. Time moved differently inside the cell. There was no clock on the wall, no phone in his pocket, no sound except for the occasional low murmur of officers in the distance. The concrete walls were cold and indifferent. But Elias Warren was not. Every breath he took was purposeful. Every second spent behind those bars only strengthened his resolve. He hadn't expected to spend the night in custody. He hadn't expected to be the latest target of the very kind of policing he had devoted his career to reforming. But here he was not as a man in charge, but as a man detained. And the irony stung more than the cuffs had. Then came the sound that broke the stillness, heels clicking on linoleum, sharp, deliberate, closer with every step. A woman appeared outside the holding cell, tall, poised, and clearly senior in rank. Her hair was neatly pulled back into a tight bun, and her uniform was crisp, untouched by arrogance. The badge on her chest read Lieutenant Vanessa Holt. She held a tablet in one hand and a file folder in the other. Her expression was one of restrained concern, professional but skeptical, and unlike the others, not clouded by presumption. She glanced at Elias, then at the paperwork. Something wasn't adding up. "What's the story here?" she asked, her tone sharp, demanding answers without theatrics. Officer Daniels stepped out from the hallway, casual and unconcerned. "Picked him up last night for reckless driving. He was resisting, too." Lieutenant Holt arched an eyebrow. "Reckless driving? You have dashcam footage?" Reed sauntered over with a cup of coffee in hand. "We were gonna get to that," he said, shrugging. "Were you?" Holt's tone sharpened. "Because I see here that Mr. Warren's record is clean. No priors. No charges. Not even a moving violation." She turned back toward the cell. "Sir, do you know why you were stopped?" she asked, her voice now directed to Elias. Elias stood slowly and stepped toward the bars. "I was told it was for swerving, which I categorically deny. I also informed the officers I had dashcam footage that could verify my driving. They ignored it." Lieutenant Holt's jaw tightened. She looked back down at the tablet and flipped through a few screens before exhaling sharply. "You never even requested the footage," she said, her voice rising now, not yelling, but infused with clear disgust. Daniel scratched the back of his neck. "We were planning to." "Planning?" she snapped. "You cuffed a man and detained him overnight based on a vague accusation, and you didn't even bother verifying it? You didn't process the evidence, and you couldn't even name the specific traffic code he allegedly violated." She turned away and barked, "Daniels. Reed. My office. Now." The two officers exchanged a look. Reed's smugness faltered, while Daniels went pale, but they obeyed and slunk down the corridor like reprimanded schoolboys. Once they were gone, Lieutenant Holt returned her attention to Elias. "I'm reviewing the dashcam footage now," she said. "And once I'm done, I'll be speaking with Internal Affairs. Please sit tight, Mr. Warren. We'll get this sorted." Elias gave her a slight nod. "Thank you, Lieutenant." As she walked away, Elias returned to the bench and sat down again, the echo of the moment still hanging in the air. The tide was turning. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Elias sat on the cold bench, back straight, hands folded calmly in his lap. Around him, the precinct had awakened, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, boots moving across tile floors. But inside the holding cell, time remained suspended. He had played the night's events over in his mind a dozen times already, every word spoken, every move made, every unjust moment. It wasn't just about the disrespect. It wasn't just about the handcuffs or the smirks or the false accusation. It was about what it represented. And now, for the first time in hours, he heard her footsteps again, firm, focused, deliberate. Lieutenant Holt returned, this time holding a department-issued tablet in one hand and a hardened expression on her face. She stopped in front of the bars, eyes locked with Elias. "We've reviewed your dashcam footage," she said. Her voice was composed, but under it was a storm of restrained anger. "It directly contradicts everything in the initial report." Elias raised an eyebrow, not surprised, but expectant. "And the officers?" "I've already spoken with them," Holt replied, her jaw tight. "They had no justification for the stop. No probable cause. What I saw was disturbing. She tapped the bars twice and motioned for the guard nearby. Let him out, she ordered. The cell door creaked open, and Elias stepped out without hesitation. He rubbed his wrists, still marked red from the handcuffs, and looked at Holt. Am I free to go? He asked. Yes, she said. But I'd like to speak with you privately first. Elias followed her down a side corridor into her office. It was minimal, just a desk, a few chairs, and a wall of commendations. No distractions. Just the weight of what had transpired. She closed the door behind them and gestured for him to sit. I'll be filing a formal report against Officers Daniels and Reed, Holt said. But there's something else. Something that's been on my mind since I saw the footage. Elias remained silent, waiting. She leaned forward slightly, folding her hands atop her desk. Who are you, really? Most people would be shouting, threatening lawsuits, demanding apologies. She hesitated, you've remained calm this entire time. You knew how to narrate your movements. You knew your rights. And you knew this wasn't your first time dealing with something like this. Elias gave her a small, composed smile. I've had to learn, he said. It's a language I was forced to become fluent in. Holt's eyes narrowed, studying him again, then nodded slowly. Fair enough, she said. But something tells me this isn't the end of the conversation. He didn't confirm or deny. Just stood. I appreciate your professionalism, Lieutenant. That's not something I take for granted. She gave a nod of respect. You know where to find me if you need anything else. Elias left the office without another word. The hallway felt different now, less oppressive, more alert. Officers turned and looked as he passed, sensing something had shifted. He exited the building and stepped out into the morning air. The sun had finally risen. But instead of heading home, Elias got into his sedan and drove toward downtown Savannah, toward a glass-fronted building with 5 stories and a gold-lettered sign that read, Savannah Public Safety Headquarters. He parked in the reserved space marked Chief of Police. As he stepped through the front doors, his assistant looked up from her desk, startled. Chief Warren? You're early. Elias gave a single nod. It's been a long night. He paused. Could you prep the main briefing room for me? I need to address the department this afternoon. Yes, sir, she said immediately, sensing the gravity in his voice. Elias continued down the hall and entered his private office. He shut the door behind him and stood in the silence for a long moment. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about the system. And now, it was time to act. The courthouse in downtown Savannah buzzed with tension. Word had spread quickly a man wrongfully detained by police was taking his case public, and whispers of misconduct were already circling. Though no cameras were allowed inside the courtroom, the steps outside were swarming with reporters, community leaders, and concerned citizens eager to see justice unfold. Inside, Elias Warren sat quietly at the defendant's table. His suit was sharp, his posture calm, but his eyes revealed the weight of everything that had happened over the last 24 hours. Beside him sat his attorney, Carmen Duarte, a woman whose courtroom reputation preceded her razor-sharp arguments, zero tolerance for injustice, and a keen instinct for turning public hearings into wake-up calls. Across the room sat Officers Daniels and Reed, now in civilian clothes. Daniels bounced his leg nervously beneath the table, while Reed leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, trying to appear unfazed. Their department-appointed attorney whispered something to them, but Daniels barely heard. The anxiety was setting in. The judge, an older man named Judge Bexley, entered the courtroom and immediately called the session to order. His presence was commanding, seasoned, no nonsense, and visibly wary of the media frenzy waiting outside. We are here today, he began, to review the events that led to the arrest and overnight detainment of Mr. Elias Warren. Prosecution, you may proceed. The prosecutor, a young assistant DA, stood and began reading from the report. On the evening of April 14, Mr. Warren was stopped for allegedly swerving into another lane and exhibiting signs of erratic driving. Officers Daniels and Reed claimed the suspect became uncooperative, resisted commands, and was taken into custody for his safety and the safety of others. Carmen Duarte didn't even look up from her notes. She waited. When the prosecutor finished, Judge Bexley turned to her. "Ms. Duarte, your response?" She stood slowly, smoothing her blazer. "Your Honor," she said, her voice calm but powerful, "the charges brought against my client are not only unsubstantiated, they are the product of racial profiling and abuse of power." Gasps murmured through the audience. "To support this," she continued, "I'd like to present direct video evidence that exposes the truth behind this encounter, footage from my client's own dash cam and the officers' body cams, which were retrieved and reviewed by precinct leadership." Judge Bexley gave a nod. "Proceed." The lights dimmed slightly as Carmen nodded to the bailiff, who rolled in a monitor. The footage began to play. It showed Elias's sedan driving steadily, staying well within the lane, never exceeding the speed limit. The patrol car's lights activated suddenly, without provocation. Then came the body cam footage, the officers' tones sharp, condescending, and most damning of all, their own words. "Another one of them causing trouble," Daniels muttered under his breath. "Figures," Reed chuckled. The audio echoed through the silent courtroom. When the video ended, Carmen Duarte addressed the room again. "This is not enforcement," she said firmly. "This is intimidation. This is assumption. And this is exactly the kind of injustice my client has worked his entire life to fight." The judge shifted in his chair. His gaze moved to the two officers, now visibly pale. Daniels looked down. Reed's confidence had vanished. Carmen turned toward Elias. "Your Honor, with your permission, my client would like to address the court directly." Judge Bexley raised an eyebrow. "Granted." Elias stood. He adjusted his tie, stepped forward, and spoke clearly so every word would carry. "My name is Elias Warren," he said. "I am the chief of police for the city of Savannah." A hush swept over the courtroom. "I was appointed to this position just 3 weeks ago. I chose not to reveal my identity during this process because I wanted the truth to emerge on its own without my title influencing its weight. And now you've seen that truth." Daniels froze in his seat. Reed's mouth fell open slightly. Elias continued, "This isn't just about what happened to me. It's about what is allowed to happen to countless others who don't wear this badge, who don't have a platform, who are treated as suspects before they're even seen as people." He paused, letting the weight settle. "That ends now." The courtroom erupted with gasps, whispers, and shock. Judge Bexley banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order! Order in the court!" But nothing could contain the shift that had just taken place. This was no longer a hearing. It was a reckoning. The murmurs that rippled through the courtroom after Chief Elias Warren revealed his identity had not yet settled when Judge Bexley called for a brief recess. People rose from their seats, stunned, whispering in disbelief. Even seasoned reporters who had covered dozens of misconduct trials clutched their notepads tighter, sensing that history was unfolding right in front of them. In a corner, Officers Daniels and Reed sat frozen. Two men who had walked into a courtroom expecting to assert control now looked like deer caught in headlights. Daniels' leg, which had been bouncing nervously, had stopped entirely. Reed stared blankly ahead, as if trying to calculate how quickly everything had unraveled. When court resumed 15 minutes later, the atmosphere had transformed. Gone was the confident posture of the prosecution. Gone was the smugness of the defense. Everyone now sat in a room charged with one thing: accountability. Judge Bexley returned to his bench with a tight expression, his gavel hitting the wood with finality. After reviewing the evidence presented, video footage, officer reports, and personal testimony, this court finds that there is no legal basis to support the detainment of Mr. Elias Warren. He paused, eyes shifting to the two officers. In fact, the footage presented reveals conduct that is not only inconsistent with departmental protocol but suggests a willful abuse of power rooted in bias. This court will be forwarding these findings to the Internal Affairs Division and the Office of Civil Oversight. He turned toward Elias and Carmen Duarte. Mr. Warren, all charges against you are hereby dismissed. The sound of that sentence felt like thunder cracking through the walls. A mixture of applause and gasps echoed across the gallery before Judge Bexley raised his hand again. I will not tolerate outbursts, but I will say this: what occurred here today is a stark reminder of the work we still must do to ensure justice is blind. This hearing is adjourned. He stood, and the courtroom followed. As the judge exited, Carmen leaned over to Elias and whispered, "They didn't just lose a case today. They exposed their entire playbook." Elias didn't respond. He simply gave her a small nod of thanks and stood, buttoning his coat. Every step he took as he exited the courtroom felt weighted not by defeat, but by responsibility. Outside, the courthouse steps had turned into a media circus. Microphones were shoved forward. Camera shutters clicked in rapid succession. Community members chanted slogans for reform. Protesters held signs that read, "Justice for Elias Warren. Protect us, don't profile us. We are not your threat." Elias raised his hand, and the crowd slowly quieted. He stepped forward, eyes steady, voice unwavering. "This case was never just about me," he said. "It was about the system. About every man, woman, and child who has been treated unfairly because of how they look, not who they are. I was lucky I had a camera, a voice, and a badge. But many don't. And that has to change." He paused. "As chief of police, I am making a public commitment today. There will be an internal investigation. Officers Daniels and Reed have been suspended effective immediately pending review. But that's just the beginning." He stepped down from the podium, walking past the swarm of cameras and microphones. There were no victory laps. No theatrics. Just a man walking forward, toward the change he had always promised to make, now backed by lived truth and public demand. That evening, news outlets across the country carried headlines like, "Police Chief Mistakenly Arrested by His Own Officers, Exposes Systemic Bias in Shocking Court Reveal." Elias Warren's silence in court turned into the loudest statement of the year. And in households all across Savannah, conversations had changed. The people weren't just listening anymore. They were demanding. The briefing room at the Savannah Public Safety Headquarters was packed. Uniformed officers stood shoulder to shoulder, some shifting uncomfortably, others watching the front of the room with unreadable expressions. The murmurs that had buzzed all morning fell into silence the moment Chief Elias Warren stepped in. He wasn't wearing a suit this time. He stood in full uniform, polished black shoes, neatly pressed shirt, badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. It was a visual reminder that this wasn't just a man who had endured an injustice. This was their leader. Their chief. The door clicked shut behind him as he moved to the center of the room, his expression composed but resolute. He didn't need a podium. He didn't need notes. He had lived the speech he was about to deliver. "Some of you already know," Elias began, voice steady but clear, "what happened to me 2 nights ago." There were no interruptions, just an ocean of eyes fixed on him. "I was pulled over without cause. Detained. Humiliated. Profiled. Not as a man. Not as a father. Not as your chief. But as a threat. Simply because of how I looked behind the wheel of my own car." His voice didn't rise, but the weight behind it grew heavier. "I didn't reveal my identity that night because I didn't want special treatment. I wanted to see how the system operated when it believed no one was watching." He scanned the room, locking eyes with officers he had barely known for 3 weeks. Some looked ashamed. Others tense. A few stood rigidly, unreadable. "And what I saw," Elias said, pausing deliberately, is what too many of our citizens already know, that for some, justice is a privilege not a right. He let the silence linger, let the words settle deep. I'm not here to shame you, he continued. I'm here to tell you the truth. If we are not part of the solution, then we are the problem. We cannot protect a community we don't understand. We cannot lead if we are led by fear or assumption. And we certainly cannot serve with honor if we use our badge as a weapon instead of a shield. Several officers shifted their weight. A few looked down. Daniels and Reed have been suspended pending full investigation. That is non-negotiable. He took a breath. But this isn't just about them. A quiet unease spread through the room. This is about culture, Elias said firmly. And culture starts at the top. It starts here. With me. With you. With every decision we make, every word we speak, every time we choose between doing what's easy and doing what's right. He stepped forward, bridging the gap between himself and the front row of officers. Beginning this week, we're implementing mandatory bias and de-escalation training for all sworn personnel. We're launching a new anonymous reporting system for misconduct, and I will personally be reviewing complaints flagged by Internal Affairs. There will be real consequences for those who disrespect the oath we took. Elias paused, then delivered the line that would be remembered. If you wear this badge to intimidate, this is your last week in uniform. But if you wear it to protect, to uplift, and to serve, then you're the future of this department. A thick silence followed. Then slowly, a hand clapped. Then another. And another. Within seconds, the room erupted in applause, not of celebration, but of acknowledgement. The kind that said, "We see you. We hear you. We're ready to be better." When Elias stepped out of the room, he didn't smile. He didn't need to. There was still so much to do. But for the first time, he wasn't alone. Weeks passed. The headlines that once screamed outrage began to shift. Where there had been protests, there were now town halls. Where there had been silence from the department, there were now weekly press briefings, transparency reports, and open-door community sessions. But change wasn't just about procedures. It was about presence. And Chief Elias Warren made sure he was everywhere. He showed up at neighborhood barbecues, in school gymnasiums, in community centers that hadn't seen a uniformed officer in years. Not to speak at people but to listen. To shake hands. To hear the stories that never made it into reports or courtrooms. Trust isn't built with policy, he often said. It's built with time. And slowly, that time began to matter. At precinct roll calls, officers no longer rolled their eyes when training sessions were announced. They asked questions. Challenged their own assumptions. Rookie recruits shadowed community mediators instead of just riding patrol. Complaints dropped. So did use of force incidents. Inside the department, the energy shifted. Where fear had ruled in silence, courage was beginning to speak. The anonymous misconduct reporting system, once dismissed as performative, had already triggered 3 investigations. Officers who had once bragged about pushing limits were suddenly quiet. The culture of casual cruelty had cracks now. And in the streets of Savannah, people noticed. It wasn't perfect. Not even close. But it was different. And one night, that difference made itself known. It was a humid Thursday evening when Elias sat on stage at a town hall in East Savannah. Folding chairs lined the gymnasium. The crowd was mixed: activists, parents, small business owners, and teenagers from the high school nearby. Elias didn't speak first. He waited. From the crowd, a young man in a plain white t-shirt raised his hand. His voice was soft, almost hesitant. "My name's Malik," he said, "and I want to say thank you." He cleared his throat. "What you went through? That could have been me. Or my dad. Or any of us. The room held its breath. But you didn't just let it slide. You stood up, and now we see cops in the neighborhood who smile at us. Who don't just come around when something's wrong. And that means something. Elias's throat tightened slightly. He nodded. Thank you, Malik, he said gently. And you're right. It could have been you. And that's why it can't be ignored anymore. He stepped forward and addressed the room not as a chief, but as a man. I'm not here to promise perfection. I'm here to promise progress. We're going to get things wrong sometimes. But we won't ignore it. We won't hide it. And we won't let it fester in the dark. He looked around the room, locking eyes with the people who once wouldn't speak to a uniform. The only way this works is together. If you see something wrong, speak up. If something doesn't feel right, tell us. We're rebuilding trust, not just enforcing laws. The room was silent. Then slowly, quietly, applause spread through the crowd. Not for a politician. Not for a headline. But for a man who had walked through injustice and chosen not vengeance, but transformation. That night, Elias sat alone in his car afterward, parked outside the now empty gym. The radio played something soft, an old Sam Cooke song about change. And for the first time in a long time, Elias didn't feel like he was fighting alone. He felt like he was leading a movement. The summer sun poured through the wide windows of the city council auditorium. It had been nearly 3 months since the night Elias Warren was pulled over on Willow Creek Road. 3 months since his life and the direction of Savannah's law enforcement had irrevocably changed. Now, he stood behind a lectern, facing an audience not of strangers, but of people who had walked beside him through fire: community advocates, neighborhood elders, fellow officers, clergy, students, and city officials. The room buzzed with anticipation, not for scandal, but for what came next. Elias straightened his shoulders and leaned into the mic. This isn't a celebration, he said plainly. It's a reckoning. He paused. 3 months ago, I sat in a holding cell as 2 officers who wore the same badge I now oversee tried to reduce me to a stereotype. They didn't know who I was. And that's exactly why it happened. Because who I was didn't matter. His voice never rose, but it filled the chamber like a rising tide. And if it could happen to me, the chief of police, what does that say to the young man just walking home? The woman driving her kids to school? The elder crossing the street after dark? He looked across the room, eyes scanning familiar faces. The truth is, accountability is not the enemy of law enforcement. It is its foundation. Without it, there is no trust. Without trust, there is no safety. And without safety, there is no justice. A hush blanketed the auditorium. I've sat with families who feared the sound of a siren more than the knock of a thief. I've heard officers tell me they were afraid to speak up about what they saw in their own ranks. Fear has no place in justice on either side. He turned to the side, motioning toward a projection screen as it flicked to life. Behind him appeared a list of departmental reforms already in place. Mandatory bias and de-escalation training. Civilian Oversight Review Board. Community Patrol Liaison Officers. Anonymous Misconduct Reporting. Monthly Public Accountability Forums. Let me be clear, Elias said, turning back to the audience, this isn't a checklist. It's a starting point. Culture takes time to change. But it changes one conversation, one decision, one person at a time. From the front row, Malik, the teenager who had once spoken up at the town hall, nodded, his eyes wide with respect. Elias gave a rare, faint smile. This isn't about one man's redemption. I didn't ask for this to happen to me. But now that it has, I will not waste it. He stepped away from the mic and moved to the center of the stage, no podium between him and the people now. I leave you with this, he said, voice steady. We cannot heal what we refuse to confront. We cannot fix what we refuse to see. And we cannot change what we're too afraid to challenge. He paused, letting the silence stretch. So if you see injustice, speak. If you hear silence, ask why. If you witness pain, stand with it. And if you have power, use it to lift others. The crowd rose to their feet, not in applause, but in affirmation. A shared understanding that this wasn't the end. It was a beginning. As Elias exited the chamber, reporters once again swarmed. But this time, he didn't stop. He didn't need a headline. His work wasn't in the spotlight. It was in the streets. In the hearts of those who were once afraid. And in the eyes of every citizen who now believed that change was not only possible, but already in motion. Justice isn't about who you are when people are watching, it's about how you act when no one knows your name. Chief Elias Warren didn't raise his voice. He didn't fight back with rage. He fought with truth, with dignity, and with the quiet power of someone who understands that real leadership doesn't demand attention. It earns respect. This story reminds us, accountability begins with courage. Change doesn't start in the courtroom, it starts with us. And silence in the face of injustice is complicity. So if you see something wrong, speak. If you feel something unfair, stand. Because one voice, grounded in truth, can shake a whole system. Share this video and let the world know, justice doesn't stay hidden forever.